That's what my daughter said on a quiet Tuesday morning, her voice steady, almost proud. For a moment, the world around me went still. The kettle was whistling, the old clock ticked on the wall, and the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. I looked at her, and instead of crying, I smiled. She thought I didn't understand. She thought age had softened my mind. But I understood every word. The house she was talking about wasn't just a building by the sea. It was where my husband and I had built our life, brick by brick, laugh by laugh, year after year. Angela looked restless, like she wanted me to react, maybe shout, maybe beg her to change her mind. But I only said softly, "If that's what you've decided, dear, then I hope it brings you peace." Her eyes flickered with confusion. She picked up her phone, nodded once, and left the kitchen. The door closed behind her, and I was alone again. The quiet after she left was heavier than her words. I sat there, hands wrapped around my cup, thinking about how quickly life changes. One day you're teaching your child to walk on the warm sand. The next, she's telling you to leave that same shore behind. But what Angela didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for years. Not out of suspicion, but out of experience. Love can be deep, but it can also be blind. My late husband, Robert, used to say, "Grace, protect the things that hold your memories, even from the people you love most. Not because you don't trust them, but because time changes hearts." So I did. Quietly. Without telling anyone. Now, sitting there, I wasn't angry. Just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from sleepless nights but from watching people you love forget what really matters. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the ocean far away. It shimmered in the morning light, calm and endless, just like the years we had spent there. I whispered to myself, "Let her think she's sold it. Let her learn, just as I once had to." Because this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the beginning of how love, pride, and silence can shape a family, and how the truth, no matter how quietly it waits, always finds its way back home. My name is Grace Miller. I'm 72 years old, though sometimes I still feel like that barefoot girl who ran along the sand, laughing as the tide chased her ankles. The beach house my daughter thought she had sold wasn't just a piece of property. It was a chapter of my life written in salt and wind. Robert and I bought that house 50 years ago. It was small, wooden, painted white with blue shutters that faced the sea. It wasn't perfect, the roof leaked every time it rained, and the stairs groaned like an old man. But it was ours. Every sound, every scratch in those walls held a memory. We built it together, not with money, but with moments. Robert was a teacher, calm, kind, with the patience of someone who understood how fragile dreams can be. I worked as a librarian in town. My days were filled with books, his with students, and our evenings with the sea. When Angela was born, that house became her world. She took her first steps on that creaky wooden floor. I still remember her laughter echoing through the open windows as Robert chased her across the sand, pretending to be a sea monster. We didn't have much, but we had peace. The kind that doesn't depend on things, just togetherness. Life went on gently, like waves against the shore. We grew older. Angela grew up. She went to college, fell in love, got married. Her husband, David, seemed kind at first. Ambitious. Well-spoken. He often told us how much he admired our simplicity, but sometimes I noticed the way his eyes wandered when we talked about the house. To him, it wasn't a home, it was an investment. A potential. A number. Still, I said nothing. I believed love would teach him what money couldn't. When Robert passed away, the sea felt colder. The house, quieter. I remember standing on the porch that night, holding his old sweater, watching the horizon fade into darkness. Angela was there, crying into my shoulder. "Mom," she said, "I'll take care of you now." I smiled, knowing she meant it. At least back then she did. The years that followed were a blur of adjustments. Angela and David moved to the city. Their lives became busier, filled with business trips, dinner parties, and promises to visit that never quite happened. I stayed at the beach house, tending the garden, reading old letters, and cooking for one. Sometimes, I'd call Angela and tell her about the sea, how it was changing color, how the gulls had nested on the roof again. She'd listen for a while, then gently steer the conversation toward her work, her stress, her plans. "Mom," she would say, "you should think about selling that place. It's too much for you to handle alone." I'd laugh softly. "Oh, sweetheart, it's not the house that handles me. It's the other way around." She didn't understand. She couldn't. Because that house wasn't just where I lived. It was where I remembered. Then, one summer, she and David came to visit. I remember how different she looked: elegant, polished, but distant. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. David spoke about investments, property taxes, and liquidating assets. I smiled politely and changed the subject to the sunset. That evening, after they'd gone upstairs, I sat alone in the living room. The sound of the ocean filled the silence. I looked at the family photos on the mantel: Robert holding baby Angela, our first Christmas tree, Angela in her graduation gown. Each frame was a piece of time I could never sell. Still, I couldn't ignore the growing distance. My daughter loved me, I knew that, but her world was no longer mine. She lived in a place where success was measured by square footage and stock values. And so, I began to prepare quietly, thoughtfully. When Robert was alive, he had once said, "Grace, promise me one thing. Never let anyone take what we built, even if they think they're doing it for your good." I promised him. And I kept that promise. With the help of an old friend, a lawyer named Samuel, who had been Robert's colleague, I set things in order. The beach house, the land, even my savings. Everything was placed in a trust that couldn't be touched without my consent. Angela didn't know. I didn't tell her. Not because I wanted to trick her, but because I wanted her to learn something deeper: that love is not ownership, and kindness is not weakness. As the years passed, Angela's visits grew fewer. Her calls became shorter. Sometimes, months would go by without hearing her voice. When she finally did call, it was usually about money, not memories. Still, I never blamed her. Life changes people. The world she lived in demanded more from her than the one I had known. I stayed patient. I stayed gentle. And then one morning, that Tuesday morning, everything changed. She arrived suddenly, her voice brisk, her eyes avoiding mine. She said it so fast, as if the words might burn her tongue if she hesitated. "We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house." And I smiled, the way you do when you finally see the storm you've been watching from afar reach your door. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. Because love, even when it disappoints us, still deserves kindness. As she walked out, her heels clicking against the wooden floor, I remembered the day she first learned to walk. Robert had stood behind her, arms open, smiling. "Come on, sweetheart," he had said. "Don't be afraid. I've got you." And maybe even now, I thought, I still had her, not in the way she believed, but in the quiet way mothers hold on. Not to control, but to protect. That night, I went through the old drawers, touching the papers I'd kept safe all these years: the trust documents, Robert's letters, the photographs. Everything was where it should be. I looked at the picture of our younger selves, Robert's arm around me, the sea behind us, and whispered, "Don't worry, love. The house is safe." The next day, I packed a small suitcase. Not because I had to leave, but because sometimes, letting others believe they've won is the gentlest way to teach them what truly matters. As the sun rose over the horizon, painting the water gold, I closed the door behind me and took one last look at the house by the sea. The seagulls cried above, the waves whispered below, and for the first time in a long while, I felt Robert's presence beside me. Angela thought she had ended something. But I knew, deep down, that we were just beginning a lesson neither of us would ever forget. The morning after Angela told me about selling the house, I sat by the window watching the waves roll in. The sea had always been honest. It never pretended to be calm when it wasn't. I admired that about it. People, on the other hand, often smile while their hearts are breaking. Angela was packing boxes in the living room. She moved quickly, her movements sharp and mechanical. Every so often she'd glance at me, as if waiting for me to say something. Maybe to stop her, maybe to argue. But I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. She sighed loudly. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is." I looked at her, my voice calm. "I'm not making anything hard, dear. You seem to be doing that on your own." She frowned but didn't reply. The sound of tape being pulled from the roll filled the room. Each rip of it felt like it was sealing away another memory. The house looked different already. Half empty, soulless. The photographs were off the walls, the books packed away. It was strange to see a life reduced to cardboard boxes. David arrived a little later, all confidence and polite smiles. He greeted me like a man who had already moved on from decency. "Morning, Grace. I hope you're not too upset. This will be a good change for everyone." I nodded, saying nothing. He had always mistaken politeness for weakness. They loaded the boxes into the car while I sat by the porch, my cane resting beside me. I watched them, not with bitterness, but with a quiet kind of sadness. The kind that comes when you realize the people you love have lost sight of what really matters. Angela came over, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Mom, I know this is hard, but you'll see, this is for the best. We'll find you a nice apartment closer to us. You'll have company, a caretaker, everything you need." I smiled faintly. "And what about everything I already have?" She hesitated. "Mom, you don't need all this space. It's just an old house." An old house. I wanted to tell her that the walls still held Robert's laughter, that the smell of the ocean in the hallway was him saying good morning. But I didn't. She wouldn't have understood. Not yet. That evening, after they left to stay at a hotel, I sat alone in the empty living room. The sound of the sea came through the open window, mingling with the faint creaks of the floorboards. I thought about how love changes shape over time, how children become strangers, not because they stop loving you, but because they start loving something else more. Money, comfort, status. Those words taste bitter, but they're real. I remembered the first time David came to the beach house. He was polite, charming, full of compliments. He said, "You know, Mrs. Miller, this place could be worth a fortune if you ever renovated it." I had smiled back then and said, "Some things gain value when you leave them as they are." He didn't understand. He never would. Angela had been different once. When she was young, she'd sit by the shore collecting seashells and tell me stories about each one. How this one was a home for a crab, or that one was a treasure from a mermaid. She had imagination, wonder, kindness. But somewhere along the way, the world taught her that love isn't enough. The first sign of trouble came 3 years ago. Angela called one night, her voice trembling but trying to sound normal. "Mom, we're having some business issues. Nothing serious, just a little setback." I told her not to worry. "Everyone faces storms, dear. Just hold on to each other." But the next month, she called again, this time, asking if I could lend them some money. I helped her, of course. Mothers always do. I sold a piece of land Robert had left behind and sent her the money without hesitation. She promised to pay me back. She never did, and I never asked. After that, the requests became more frequent. Not always direct. Sometimes just hints. "Things are tight right now," or "David's company needs one more investment." I could hear the strain in her voice, the pride fighting with guilt. One evening I asked gently, "Are you happy, sweetheart?" There was a long pause. Then she said, "Of course I am." But her voice broke at the end. I think that's when I knew something inside her was changing. Then, a few months before she sold the house, David started calling me directly. His tone was smooth, too smooth. "Mrs. Miller," he said one night, "you really should think about updating your will. These old houses can be a burden for your daughter later on. Better to handle it while you can." I smiled into the phone and said, "Thank you for your concern, David. I've already handled it." He didn't know how true that was. Not long after that, Angela stopped calling altogether. Weeks went by. Then one day, she showed up unannounced, standing in the doorway like a stranger, holding papers in her hand. That's when she said it. "We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house." It was like watching someone tear a photograph in half. But still, I didn't fight. I'd learned long ago that when people are blinded by desperation, arguing only makes them stumble further. The only cure is experience. So I let her believe it. I let her think she'd succeeded. That night, I packed my bag slowly. Not much, just a few clothes, some letters, Robert's photograph, and a seashell Angela had given me when she was 6. I ran my fingers along its ridges, remembering her little voice saying, "This one's lucky, Mommy. Keep it forever." I smiled. I still had it. And it had done its job well. When morning came, Angela arrived early, ready to drive me away. Her tone was brisk, businesslike. "Mom, we should go now before the buyers come to finalize things." I nodded. Of course. As we drove away, I watched the house grow smaller in the rearview mirror. The sea shimmered in the distance, as calm as ever. I whispered goodbye under my breath, though I knew I'd see it again soon. Angela glanced at me. "Mom, are you angry?" "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "Just thinking." She sighed. "You always say that." We arrived at their apartment in the city, large, modern, sterile. Everything was glass and steel. No warmth. No scent of the sea. Just the hum of traffic below and the cold glow of screens. She tried to make me comfortable, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the nervous way she kept checking her phone. She wasn't proud of what she'd done, just scared of what she'd become. I didn't lecture her. I just smiled and asked about her life, her work, her health. The more I asked, the more her eyes softened. Maybe she expected anger, maybe even tears, but what she found instead was calmness, the kind that can only come from truth. Days passed. The new owners tried to register the beach house. That's when the calls started. First to David, then to Angela. Confusion, panic, frustration. The house, it turned out, was not legally theirs to sell. The trust papers, the ones I had quietly signed with Samuel years ago, held firm. My late husband's foresight, my promise, and my silence had protected everything. One evening, Angela came home pale, her eyes wide. "Mom," she said quietly, "can I talk to you?" I nodded. She sat across from me, her voice trembling. "They said, the sale isn't valid. They said the house isn't even under my name." I took a sip of tea and looked at her gently. "That's correct." She blinked. "You knew." I did. Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because, my love," I said softly, "some lessons must be lived, not told." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You were testing me?" I shook my head. "No. I was protecting you from yourself." For the first time in years, she looked at me like the little girl who once believed seashells carried magic. The silence between us stretched, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of things unsaid: regret, realization, love. Soft instrumental fade in. The scene transitions to evening light spilling through curtains. The mother's face calm, the daughter's tearful, the air between them full of quiet truth. That was the night everything began to change, not just for Angela, but for me, too. Because even forgiveness, when it comes, asks us to face the pain first. Angela sat across from me that evening, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process everything. The city lights glowed behind her through the wide glass windows, but her face looked dim. The kind of dim that comes not from darkness, but from realization. "Mom," she whispered again, "I don't understand. How could the house not be mine? Dad left everything to you." I nodded slowly. "He did. And later, I made sure it would stay that way." Her voice cracked. "But why didn't you trust me?" I sighed softly and looked out the window for a moment before answering. "It's not about trust, my love. It's about protection. There's a difference." She frowned, confused. I continued gently. "When your father died, I saw how fragile love can be when life becomes difficult. People make choices, not because they stop loving, but because fear starts whispering louder than love. Your father once told me, 'Grace, protect our home from time and temptation.' I didn't fully understand then. But I do now." Angela looked away, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. "You thought I'd do something like this?" I smiled sadly. "I hoped you wouldn't. But I prepared, just in case." Silence filled the room. Only the sound of the city traffic far below and the slow tick of the wall clock remained. After a while, she said in a low voice, "David didn't tell me to do it." "Not exactly. He just said it made sense that keeping the house was impractical. He said it was for your own good." I nodded. "And you believed him?" She swallowed hard. "I wanted to. I thought maybe if I helped him fix his company, he'd see how much I cared. He's been under so much pressure." Her eyes filled again, but this time not with guilt, with exhaustion. The kind that comes from years of pretending everything is fine. "Angela," I said softly, "love is not proven by sacrifice. Not the kind that costs your peace. I learned that the hard way." She looked up, surprised. "You?" I smiled. "Yes, me. When your father and I were young, there was a man who wanted to buy the beach house. He offered far more than it was worth. Robert considered it. We could have moved into town, had more money, more comfort. But then one night, he said something I never forgot. He said, 'Grace, I don't want to live somewhere I can't hear the sea.' That night, I realized we weren't keeping the house because of its walls. We were keeping it because of what it held. Our life. Our laughter. Our roots." I paused. "That's why, when you said you'd sold it, I didn't argue. I wanted you to understand that some things cannot be sold. They can only be lost, and sometimes, losing them teaches us more than keeping them ever could." Her tears spilled freely now. She covered her face with her hands and whispered, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought you didn't care about money. I thought you were being careless." I leaned forward and touched her hand. "I never cared about money, Angela. But I always cared about you. I still do." She squeezed my fingers, her shoulders shaking. For a long moment, we just sat there, 2 generations bound by love, regret, and the quiet understanding that comes too late but still in time. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the guest room, staring at the moonlight spilling across the floor. I thought about Robert, about the years we'd shared, and about the girl Angela used to be. Maybe this was what life really was, learning the same lessons again and again, just in different forms. The next morning, Angela made me breakfast. It was the first time in years she'd cooked for me. The eggs were slightly overdone, the toast unevenly buttered, but I ate every bite with gratitude. She sat across from me, quiet. Then she said, "David doesn't know yet. About the house. I don't know how he'll react." I looked at her gently. "Tell him the truth. Then watch what he chooses. That will tell you everything you need to know." She nodded slowly, deep in thought. That evening, I heard them talking in the next room. His voice was sharp, hers soft but firm. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught phrases. "How could you not know? She tricked us." "No, she didn't." Then, silence. A long, heavy silence. A few minutes later, Angela came out, pale but composed. "He's leaving," she said quietly. "He said he needs time to think." I only nodded. "Then let him." She sat beside me, her eyes red. "Mom, what if he doesn't come back?" I put an arm around her shoulders. "Then maybe he was never really here." She leaned into me like she used to when she was a child, resting her head against my shoulder. "I thought love meant giving everything," she murmured. "It does," I said softly. "But only when the other person isn't taking everything away." We sat like that for a long time. The city outside faded into twilight. A few days passed. Angela didn't leave the apartment much. She went to work, came back quiet, thoughtful. She started cooking dinner for us every night, small meals, simple but full of care. One evening, as she was chopping vegetables, she said, "Mom, do you ever regret protecting the house like that?" I smiled. "No. Because it wasn't just about the house. It was about what it represented: our family, our history. The things that hold us together even when we drift apart." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand now." Then she looked at me, her eyes soft. "Would you ever move back?" I hesitated. "One day. When the sea calls again." That night, I dreamed of Robert. He was standing by the shore, the sun behind him, smiling. "You did well, Grace," he said. "You kept the promise." I woke with tears in my eyes but peace in my heart. A week later, Angela came to me with an envelope in her hands. "Mom," she said, "I went to see Samuel, your lawyer friend. He showed me the papers. You really did protect everything. The trust, the savings, the land. You even set aside money for me." "Why?" I smiled. "Because I knew this day would come, the day you'd need to see that love isn't about control or fear. It's about giving someone a second chance without making them ask for it." She stood there, speechless. Then she said quietly, "Mom, I don't deserve that." "Maybe not. I said gently. But you need it. And sometimes, grace isn't earned. It's given. She hugged me tightly, sobbing into my shoulder. I don't know how to make this right. Start by visiting the sea, I whispered. Not the house, the sea. The place where it all began. 2 days later, we drove back together. The air grew fresher as the city disappeared behind us, replaced by open fields and the smell of salt. When the ocean finally came into view, Angela gasped softly. The house stood just as it always had, white paint a little faded, shutters open, seagulls circling overhead. The for sale sign was gone, replaced by silence and wind. We parked the car. She stepped out slowly, her shoes crunching against the gravel. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at it. Then she whispered, "It's still here." I smiled. Of course it is. Some things wait for us, no matter how far we go. She walked up to the porch, ran her hand along the railing, and turned to me. I thought I'd never see it again. You never lost it, I said softly. You just forgot how much it meant. Inside, everything was as I had left it. The furniture covered in sheets, the faint scent of the sea still clinging to the walls. Angela moved through the room slowly, touching everything as if trying to memorize it. She stopped in front of Robert's old armchair. I can almost see him sitting here, she whispered. I nodded. He'd be happy to see you back. We spent the day cleaning, dusting, opening windows. The breeze flowed through the house again, filling it with life. In the evening, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and pink. Angela turned to me, her face calm, almost childlike again. Mom, can I stay here for a while? I smiled gently. As long as you like. Soft piano. Camera pans from the mother's gentle smile to the horizon, the waves shimmering under the fading light. Faint sound of seagulls whined through old curtains. That night, as the stars appeared above the quiet sea, Angela sat beside me and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I took her hand and said, "You can't sell love, Angela. It doesn't work that way." She laughed softly, through her tears. I know that now. And in that moment, I realized that maybe all those years of silence, all those quiet choices, had finally led us here. Not to an ending, but to understanding. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The air was heavy, and the wind from the sea carried that scent of salt and distance. I made tea the way Robert used to like it, with a drop of honey and no sugar. Old habits don't die easily. They just live quietly inside you. Angela came down the stairs with her suitcase. She didn't look at me at first. Her eyes were swollen from the night before. She mumbled something about leaving early because the buyers were waiting for the final signatures. I nodded, calm as ever. Of course, dear. Everything must go according to your plan. She looked at me then, almost like she was searching for anger, but found only silence. Mom, she said after a long pause, you're taking this very well. I smiled. I've learned that peace doesn't mean everything is fine. It just means I choose not to fight what's already decided. Angela sighed, picked up her bag, and stepped outside. The car was already running, her husband waiting. I followed her to the door, watching her shoulders tremble as she opened it. For a brief moment, she turned around. Do you want to come, Mom? You don't have to stay here alone. I looked past her, toward the horizon where the sun was just breaking through the clouds. No, sweetheart, I said softly. I think I'll stay a little longer. Just until the tide comes in. She nodded, half confused, half relieved, and left. When the car disappeared down the road, I finally exhaled. I wasn't angry, only sad for what she would soon discover. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Good morning, Ms. Harris," I said when the familiar voice answered. "Grace," she exclaimed. "It's been so long. I was wondering when I'd hear from you again." "It's time," I said simply. "The thing Robert arranged. I believe we've reached that moment." Ms. Harris was my lawyer, a kind, discreet woman who had known our family for decades. She understood right away. "You mean the house?" "Yes," I whispered. "It seems Angela thinks she's sold it." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then a gentle chuckle. "Then she's in for quite a surprise, isn't she?" I smiled faintly. Not a cruel surprise. Just one that might teach her what we couldn't. We arranged a meeting later that week. By then, Angela and her husband had already signed what they thought were final papers. They had celebrated, I'm told, believing they'd made a clever decision. But the beach house wasn't under Angela's name. It hadn't been for years. After Robert passed away, he left everything to me, but with a clause we both agreed upon. The property would be held in a private trust. It could never be sold, rented, or transferred without both our signatures, mine and the lawyer's. It was Robert's way of protecting me, not from our daughter, but from the ways life can twist when love mixes with need. Angela didn't know. I never told her because I didn't think she needed to know. Until now. When she arrived at the lawyer's office a few days later, she looked furious and embarrassed. "Mom, what is this? They said the sale can't go through. The bank rejected the payment." I kept my tone calm. "It's because you don't own the house, darling. You never did." Her face turned pale. "What do you mean? Dad left it to me." "No," I interrupted softly. "He left it to us. To me and through me to you. But not yet. You see, the house was placed in a trust before he passed. I'm the only living trustee now." She stared at me like I was speaking another language. "You mean, you tricked me?" I shook my head. "No, Angela. I protected you. And our memories. That house is more than wood and paint. It's where your father taught you to ride a bike. It's where you learned to swim. Where we buried our time capsule in the garden." Her eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to help us, Mom. I didn't mean." "I know," I said, reaching for her hand. "You thought it would make life easier. But sometimes, the easiest road takes us farthest from home." She broke down then, quietly. No shouting. Just a long, trembling sigh, the kind that carries regret and relief at the same time. I pulled her close, and for a moment, she was a child again. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "I thought you'd hate me." I smiled, brushing her hair back. "Angela, there's nothing you could do that would make me stop loving you. But love also means letting people face their own choices." We sat there for a long while. No one spoke. The ocean breeze outside the window was the only sound. Then I said, "Your father once told me something I'll never forget. He said, the things we build with love should never be traded for comfort." I didn't understand it then. But I do now. You see, this house wasn't built to be sold. It was built to remind us who we are. Angela nodded slowly, tears running down her face. "I don't deserve it, Mom," she whispered. "You do," I said. "But you need to learn how to deserve it again. The house will always wait just like love does." We left the office together that day. The wind outside smelled of rain, and I remember thinking how endings sometimes look like new beginnings. 4 weeks after that, Angela didn't visit. I didn't call her either. I knew she needed time not to forgive me, but to forgive herself. Every evening, I'd walk down to the beach. The waves would reach my feet, soft and cold, and I'd watch the horizon until the sky turned orange. I'd whisper to Robert in my mind, "She's learning, love. Just like we did." Then one evening, when the tide was high and the sky pale blue, I saw her car again in the driveway. She stepped out slowly, holding something in her hand, an envelope. She walked toward me, eyes red but calmer than before. "Mom," she said quietly, "I think I understand now." I smiled. "I knew you would, sweetheart." She handed me the envelope. "These are the papers for the trust. I want you to keep them. And I want to help maintain the house, not sell it. Maybe we can restore it together." My chest tightened. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The sea roared softly behind us, and for the first time in a long time, I saw peace in her eyes, not pride, not guilt, just peace. We walked back to the porch, sat on the old swing Robert built, and watched the waves crash. The wood creaked under us, the way it used to when she was little. She whispered, "Dad would be proud of you, Mom." I looked at her, smiling through tears. "No, darling. He'd be proud of us." Angela stayed that evening. It was the first time in months we'd shared a quiet night under the same roof. She made tea strong, a bit too sweet, and we sat in the kitchen where everything had started. The same table, the same soft ticking of the clock, the same smell of sea salt carried in through the windows. Only now, there was something new between us: honesty. It wasn't heavy like before. It was light, almost peaceful. "After a while," she said softly, "I kept thinking about how you didn't yell at me. Not once. You just stayed calm." I smiled faintly. When you've lived long enough, you learn that shouting never fixes silence. Sometimes, love means letting people make their own noise until they're ready to hear the quiet. She nodded, taking that in. I think I was angry at myself more than anything. I wanted so badly to prove I could take care of everything. But I forgot who I was trying to protect. "You were trying to protect your family," I said, reaching across the table. "And that's a good thing, Angela. You just took the wrong road. It happens to all of us." She looked up at me, eyes soft. "Do you forgive me?" "Of course," I said immediately. "There's nothing to forgive. We both just needed to remember what this place really means." That night, we walked down to the beach together. The tide was low, and the moonlight spilled silver across the sand. I could hear her breathing beside me, slow, steady, like she'd finally set something down. We stopped by the old driftwood bench Robert had built years ago. The wood was cracked, but it still held strong. She brushed off the sand and sat down. "Do you ever miss him?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "But not in a sad way. More like, he's part of the air here. Every time the wind moves through the house, I feel him." She smiled. "I used to think grief was something you had to get over. Now I see it's something you learn to live with, like the ocean. It's always there, sometimes calm, sometimes wild." "That's exactly right," I said quietly. "Love doesn't end, it just changes its shape." We sat there until the stars came out. The sound of the waves filled the spaces where words used to be. The next few weeks passed gently. Angela started visiting more often. She'd bring groceries, sometimes her little daughter, my granddaughter, Lily. The house began to feel alive again. One morning, I found Angela sweeping the porch. She was humming an old song I used to sing when she was small. I watched her from the kitchen window for a long time, smiling. When she came in, she said, "I think this place needs a bit of love again. The shutters are peeling. The garden's wild." "I was waiting for the right hands to fix it," I said. She grinned. "Then you found them." We started small. Repainting the porch. Cleaning out the attic. Finding old boxes filled with letters, photographs, and seashells Lily had collected. One afternoon, Angela found a faded envelope tucked inside an old book. She opened it carefully and pulled out a letter written in Robert's familiar handwriting. "Mom," she said softly, "did you know this was here?" I shook my head. "No, dear." "What does it say?" She read aloud. "To my Grace and my little girl. If you're reading this, it means time has done its quiet work. I just want you both to remember that the world is wide, but the heart is small, and that's why we must keep it clean. Don't fill it with anger or fear. Keep it open, even when it hurts. Because one day, love will find its way back in. Robert." Angela's voice broke at the end. She held the letter close to her chest. "He always knew," she whispered. I nodded. He did. He always believed that love fixes what pride breaks. We framed that letter and hung it in the hallway, right beside the front door, so that every person who entered or left the house would see it. As the weeks passed, Angela and I grew closer. She would often stay the night, and in the mornings, we'd sit on the porch drinking coffee, watching Lily chase seagulls. One evening, while Lily was asleep, Angela turned to me. "I want to tell you something," she said. Her voice trembled a little. "After Dad passed, I felt lost. And when Mark started talking about money and security, I thought maybe selling the house was a way to fix things. I thought I was being practical. But I was really just scared." I listened quietly. "Scared of what?" "Of losing everything. Of losing you. Of losing what little family I had left." I took her hand. "Angela, love doesn't disappear when life gets hard. It just hides until we remember to look for it again." She nodded, eyes wet. "I think I see that now. And I don't want to lose this again." "You won't," I said softly. "This house isn't going anywhere. And neither am I." A soft rain began to fall outside, the kind that makes the world feel small and safe. We sat there in silence, just listening. The smell of wet earth, the sound of rain tapping the roof, it felt like forgiveness had finally arrived, quiet and real. Days turned into months. The garden bloomed again. The walls smelled of fresh paint. And one evening, as the sun set behind the waves, Angela brought out a photo album. "Look at this," she said, flipping through the pages. There were pictures of Robert teaching her to fish, of me holding her as a baby, of the three of us on that very porch, smiling into the wind. She looked up. "You know, I used to think growing up meant leaving things behind. But now I think it means learning what's worth keeping." I nodded, touched. "That's all life really is, my dear, learning what's worth keeping." From that day, the house no longer felt heavy with memories. It felt alive again, filled with laughter and cooking smells, children's footsteps, and music. Sometimes I'd catch Angela standing at the window, staring out at the sea. When I asked what she was thinking, she'd smile and say, "I'm just listening to the ocean, Mom. It reminds me of Dad." And I'd smile too. "It reminds me of you." One evening, as we sat by the fire, Lily climbed into my lap with a question. "Grandma, is this your house?" I smiled and said, "It's our house, sweetheart. It belongs to everyone who loves it." Angela looked up at me, eyes soft, understanding the weight of those words. When Lily fell asleep, Angela whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me." I brushed her hair gently. That's what mothers do. We wait. Sometimes for a long time, but we wait. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and together we watched the fire crackle. The wind outside howled softly, but inside the room, it was warm not just from the fire, but from something deeper. Peace. The kind of peace that only comes when love wins over fear. Years passed. The house by the sea remained as it always had, weathered, strong, and full of stories. Angela and I grew closer with each passing day. She had learned to see the world through quiet understanding instead of fear. And I had learned that letting go of anger does not weaken love, it strengthens it. Sometimes, on warm afternoons, we would sit on the porch together, sipping tea while Lily played in the sand. She'd chase the waves, laughing, unaware that the lessons of the past were quietly shaping her too. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Angela turned to me. "Mom," she said softly, "I don't think I'll ever take this house for granted again." I smiled, my eyes tracing the shimmer of the waves. "It's not the house you need to remember, Angela. It's what it holds, the love, the memories, and the people who care. Those are the treasures that never fade." She nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "I understand now. And I'll make sure Lily knows too." The sea whispered beside us, gentle and patient, carrying with it all the secrets of time. I realized then that life is a lot like the ocean. It can be calm or stormy, but it always returns to balance. And sometimes, it takes us a while to learn how to ride the waves without losing ourselves. I thought of Robert, of the years we shared, and of the trust we had built quietly over time. I thought of Angela, of her mistakes and her courage to face them. I thought of myself, and how much patience, silence, and hope can heal what seems broken. As darkness fell, Angela rested her head on my shoulder. I felt the soft rise and fall of her breathing, steady and peaceful. I realized that even though we had faced betrayal, mistakes, and fear, love had survived it all. Love, patient, forgiving, and quiet, had brought us back together. Sometimes, I would sit alone by the water, watching the waves roll in. I would whisper to the sea, thanking it for carrying us through life's storms. And I knew, in some small way, the house by the sea was more than just walls and memories. It was a reminder that even when we stumble, even when we feel lost, the heart remembers what matters most. And that, I thought, is the greatest lesson of all. Life will test you, family will challenge you, and love will sometimes hide in silence. But if you are patient, kind, and willing to forgive, you will find your way back to each other. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and old wood. I looked at Angela, her face peaceful in the last light of day. I looked at Lily, chasing her shadow across the sand. And I smiled, knowing that in the end, love had always been the strongest tide. Some lessons come slowly. Some lessons come quietly. But the ones worth learning stay with you forever, in the heart, in the home, in the gentle, endless rhythm of the sea. I closed my eyes, taking in the waves, the laughter, the warmth, and the life that had returned to the house. And in that moment, I understood something simple, yet profound. Home isn't just a place. It's love. It's patience. It's forgiveness.